Greetings, truth seekers, paradigm busters, new world orders, civil disobedience, freedom fighters, free thinkers, higher mammals, good people of all types. How's it going? My name is Michael Parker, and welcome to Electric Pyramid, coming to you as always from an undisclosed location somewhere in Hollywood, California. And ladies and gentlemen, our guest for the evening, Stephen LaChance. We were going to talk about his book, which is called Blessed Are the Wicked. I don't know what happened to him. I tried to reach out to him several times today, and his publicist did as well, and no response. So tonight's show had been booked for weeks, ladies and gentlemen. And so instead, Joe and I are going to take your questions from the chat room, and we are also going to be having a interview in just a little bit with John Zaffis. Now, this was a previously recorded interview, and John Zaffis is an extremely famous paranormal investigator, and he was actually involved with the Stephen LaChance story that we were going to do tonight. So in a little bit, we will turn that on. It's an interview that I did several years ago, and it's very popular on my YouTube page. So we're going to be playing that. It talks a lot about demonology and spirits and exorcism and things of that nature. But yeah, so Stephen, I'm, and Llewellyn, the publisher, I don't know what happened, but I hope Stephen is all right wherever he is. And hopefully maybe he can come on at some point in the future. Is Joe Kiernan still there?
I am still here.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, hey, I hope they call in. Right, I hope all is well. That's really what it is too. I really hope all is well.
I do too.
But I will relish the opportunity to just sneak some chuckles in here and there.
Absolutely, and if you guys had any questions you ever wanted to ask Joe or I, we would love to try to answer them. I am in the chat room, and so is Joe, and so there's that. Now, I think we were talking last week about the earthquakes and the booms. And then you sent me an email earlier today. In Connecticut, now they're having the earthquakes. And
quite a few. I believe they've had 12 within the last 7 days, if I'm not mistaken.
I think so. And they're all under, I think, 3.1. And now that might not sound particularly dramatic to anyone, but really Connecticut and New England, like Texas, is not really known for earthquakes. And it begs to question, so what's going on? I mean, why is 2015, 2014, 2013 so seismically active in these areas where it's usually not? And on top of that, then we've got these strange anomalous booms that people are hearing.
One of the local news reports from their local Channel 8 affiliate. I'm sorry, I don't recall the call letters, but I had gone back on YouTube day by day to get the first reports that were coming out about Connecticut's earthquakes, and the first reports that I saw come out were all about booms the day prior. So maybe they were smaller earthquakes. It wasn't clear. They didn't return to that to say if anything had been picked up that day prior, but a lot of reports had come in apparently, and I start to wonder if there are a signal between one or the other, if there is any correlation between both and any relativity at all.
Well, I think there must be some, and when we were talking about the Seneca guns last week, and they were saying that at least in the case of the Seneca guns, they could not correlate the booms, the Seneca guns, with seismic activity. But last week, when we were having the Irving, Texas earthquakes, there was, I think, 15 over about 2 or 3 days, all centered around Irving, Texas. There were earthquakes also in Oklahoma and booms, I believe, in Tennessee. And in that particular case, the boom was heard, but it wasn't heard when they had the earthquake. So it's hard to say what's going on here. I mean, logically, you would have to think that the booms would be related to seismic activity, but that's not a given, as it looks like.
No, it sure doesn't, especially when they're just irregular like that. I can relate to the Seneca booms. So it's tough for me because when we hear them here, Michael, we don't have the earthquakes.
Mm-hmm.
They're very, very few and far between here when we have earthquakes. And when they are within the state of South Carolina, they're very small, usually 2 or less, and they're usually not coastal. It's usually in the higher elevations of South Carolina, which are quite distant from here. It's a 4 or 5 hour drive. So there's usually not a lot of tectonic activity, not so much here, but the booms, as you know, we've spoken about it not just last week, in the past as well, that
many
reports known as these, in this area, as the Seneca guns, have gone back well over 100 years.
I think I was reading today the first written record of the Seneca guns goes back to like the 1850s. I believe it was Ambrose Pierce or something who wrote about them. And it's just odd because we're hearing these sounds that nobody can sort out. And then we've got North America being riddled by these swarms of quakes in places that really just don't see that much seismic activity. So, I don't know. I mean, I was listening to a thing that Linda Moulton Howe did about 10 months ago, and I was kind of trying to listen to it quickly before the show. And part of what she was trying to get at was this idea that there are magma chambers under the ground and the core of the earth, that this was somehow causing the crustal plates to move around. Listen, it may be, but if that's the case, then why is that happening? And why now? Is this tied to maybe even solar cycles? What's causing?
Well, I wouldn't put it past the solar cycle. I sure wouldn't, because that's just,
I agree,
an infinite amount of energy that we can't even begin to understand. However, one of the ideas I have been buying into lately is in relation to our weather patterns. More specifically, I'm trying to look at these in curiosity if there are low pressure systems hanging out for that area for a while, because what people don't realize, it's not just me saying it. I'm just buying onto a lot of the recent science ideas coming out on this, where if the storms are large enough for the area, the low depression system is large enough, it's literally releasing weight off of the earth below it. It's literally what it's doing. When it's a high pressure system, it's really forcing down a force on the earth, compressing it. So when you have a large system of low pressure, it's basically releasing some weight from the earth below it. And so some of these larger storms, I have to wonder, is it really starting to cause an effect? Because they're saying when a high pressure is above it and it's pushing down with force, it's keeping things a little tight. And when these larger systems of low pressure that are continuously going over, it's more acting almost like a vacuum, they were saying, where it's lifting the crust up, if you will. And I could understand that, and it seems plausible, but it just seems quite a bit active lately in very peculiar places is the only thing that's really throwing me off.
Well, consider this.
If we talk about low pressure in Connecticut this time of year, that's what you get.
Well, before the show, I was reading an article where people were connecting some of the earthquakes to weather. Okay. And part of that was in the northern United States and in Canada, it has been so damn cold. Literally, it's colder than the surface of Mars, that this can actually freeze large bodies of water that are underground. And when it freezes quickly, that if you've left a beer in the freezer or something, what happens? The liquid inside of it expands and breaks the bottle.
It's a party
so
shot.
some people are putting forth this idea that, perhaps some of this is related to ice underground, because it froze so quickly that when it expands, it's moving the ground and creating these these explosions, these boom type sounds. I mean, this is all conjecture right now. I mean, everyone's trying to figure out what this is. And, there are no consummate answers yet. I will say this. In the southern states, I do believe that a lot of this is still related to fracking, regardless of what kind of mainstream geologists or seismologists are saying. As we discussed last week, I mean, all you have to do is go on the USGS page and you see that phrase, induced seismicity, which is basically man-made earthquakes. Now, some people have pointed out that, and I cannot verify this, I don't live in Connecticut, but that there is not a lot of fracking going on in Connecticut. So I cannot speak to that, what's causing the quakes there. One of the local geologists was saying, listen, hey, we have these swarms of earthquakes every now and then, and they come, and pretty much the same story they were saying in Texas. Don't worry so much about this, because we have these swarms of quakes, and when they come in swarms, and then they usually dissipate. But unlike California, you're not going to get gigantic quakes or quakes above, the 5.0, which are going to do a lot of damage to your home. But what I did read was that still, like in Texas, the insurance business has certainly increased in the last couple of weeks, because people are spending, $100 extra a year on their insurance premiums for their homes to get, extended earthquake coverage. So I wish I could get it that cheap out here, but I mean, this is just a really strange thing. And 5 years ago, 7 years ago, this whole boom phenomena was not really something you heard much about. But since 2011, there's been a major uptick in these strange sounds. Now, before that, people would talk about the Taos hum, which is debatable. I have friends who've lived in New Mexico, said they've never, ever heard it. But a hum, an ongoing hum, is different from a boom or a shockwave type sound that happens suddenly and can actually, you can actually feel it. So the hum, I don't know what that is. Some people debate the fact that it even exists, but these booms, there's no question that they exist.
Well, these booms, from what I can say is these sound similar to a gunshot, something like that, but so much larger, where you feel it, but it's different. You know it's different. Where if you were, in my case, I've stepped outside my house, as if you're going to see something, right? But I've gone outside, and you see other neighbors go outside looking at the same thing. Did you hear that? Did you know what the hell was that? My picture shook. My dishes shook. It's like, wow, this happens every few months. And I've told you stories. I've met people, a friend's mother would. One of these booms, she claims, broke her plate glass window in her living room.
Yeah, you told me that.
There's stories like this all the time with them, and they are unique. When I hear them, I say to my wife, "That's one of those booms," and she says, "Yeah, it was." It's just completely different. They're usually not like back to back, so it's not like a boom boom. It's not a banging. It's just one loud bang will just come randomly, and it really captures your attention. I do understand. I don't know if it's coming from above, below. I don't know because it's just different, Michael. It's just that different where I'm just baffled by it. I don't know.
The only thing, because I've never heard it, but I can tell you that when I was here for the Northridge quake, and I'll tell you, brother, it was the scariest thing I think I've ever dealt with in my life. I wasn't married at that point, but my girlfriend, who would become my wife, she and her friends were actually in San Diego that night. They'd gone down there to see a band, and they had come back, and they had had a great night. And she lived kind of in West Hollywood, and these quakes happened in the middle of the night. I think they were like 4:00. And so she and her girlfriends had kind of just gotten home just, hour or two beforehand, and they were still in a jolly mood. And when I was finally able to get through to them a couple hours later, they were not as freaked out as I was. I was completely freaked. You heard a sound. It seemed to go on forever. Wow. It was an extraordinary event. I was looking out my windows from the second floor back towards the Hollywood Hills. And I swear to God, man, it was like aliens were landing or something, because transformers were exploding on the telephone poles, and all of the car alarms go off. And, you know, this earthquake goes on for what seems like a minute, but really I think it's only 15 or 20 seconds. But when it is happening at that extreme shake, I mean, it was the scariest thing, maybe the scariest thing I've ever dealt with. And it was extraordinary. But my point was, you could actually hear a rumble. And the times that I've been through the larger quakes out here, there is a strange sound, but it's a rumble, and it's a strange, eerie sound. I've never heard the booms. I can only imagine what that's like. But yeah, earthquakes, very, very strange. And we will continue,
man.
Yeah, we will continue to follow the story.
Well, I have one thing for you here.
Yep.
Zaphod, I know I'm going to pronounce that wrong.
In the chat room?
Yeah, in the chat room.
I saw something here. Yeah, go for it.
Well, I just lost it myself.
Was it the bit about electromagnetic radiation or something?
Oh, boy, where did I
think I see it here. He's got two questions. Bear with me.
He was asking if it was... here we go. Could the booms be oscillations of electromagnetics between the changing of harmonic relationships between the planets?
That's above my pay grade, Joe.
Do you believe there's any planetary influence in relation to that, Michael?
Well, I'm not a physicist, but like we said earlier, there are people that think that it's related to solar cycles as well. And I wouldn't discount that. I mean, this is an electric universe, regardless of what.
I mean, I do believe the planets lay influence on other planets, whether we acknowledge them or not.
I agree.
In physics, it kind of has to.
There is Jim Birkeland is a geologist, and he's kind of a rogue geologist, but he's the guy that nailed the 1989 World Series quake.
Oh.
And part of his thing is that during certain lunar periods, because when the moon is it with the full moons? Basically, I can't explain the math, but the idea is there are certain times when you have a supermoon or what have you. Anyway, it causes the tides to rise. Now, what happens is you're talking about a gigantic mass.
Right.
This is water. These are God knows how many hundreds of thousands of millions of tons that are now moving across the crustal plate of the Earth. And this is caused by the Earth's relationship to the moon. And the moon causes the tides all the time. But there are certain lunar phases when it exerts even more influence on tides. And that is part of what he uses to predict earthquakes. Now, a lot of mainstream geologists, seismologists don't want to take what he has to say seriously. But another thing that he looks at is he goes in the paper and, these days you do it on the internet. But back when I was first looking into Jim's work 15 years ago, at that point, people would still go into a newspaper and look in the lost and found. And if you look in the lost pets area, part of what he would look for is like there's a sudden uptick in the amount of pets that will become lost prior to an earthquake, which kind of also harkens back to 2006 when we had the gigantic tsunami. And a lot of people were wondering, well, wait a minute, how did the animals know? Because a lot of the animals tried to go uphill.
Right.
To get
sure
before
did.
the quake hit. And I've got to say, with my particular animals, I have never really noticed that they've been particularly knowledgeable, unfortunately, on when a quake is going to hit. They've certainly been scared when it happened. But animals are in touch with the magnetic field of the planet, and they can tell when things are happening. So, to answer Zaphod's question, I don't know, but I think that's probably has something to do with it. Yes, it's an electric universe. The solar cycles are like 11 years between maximum and minimum. And I think that has to do a lot with climate change. And it could happen to possibly affect the crustal plates as well. Who knows?
It sounds perfectly logical to me.
And
it's a big beast that we're not going to be able to tackle. It's really something where we're such in the infancy of learning the tectonic still. We really are.
well, what's interesting to me is that it's happening all of a sudden because I don't think people predicted the 21st century. Everybody thought we'd have flying cars or things like that, but nobody thought we were going to have these rogue earthquakes in places like Connecticut. So, the surprises continue to add up. But from the future, let's go into the past. Last week we didn't get to talk about this, but you brought up a story to me, and I'm going to let you say the word because I'm not even sure I could pronounce it. But there was a shipwreck that was found, I guess, by some Spanish explorers, and I believe this dated back to 600 BC. Is that correct, Joe?
Yes, the shipwreck is dated to 600 BC.
And what did they find on there?
Orichalcum.
Explain what that is.
It's known today. I'll speak as in ancient times. Okay. I know of orichalcum from Plato's description. Plato describes it very well as a very high prized, elaborate metal that was covering many temples, and it shined with such great brilliance. And he would describe it that it was different than all other metals, and it had a warming quality to its sight. And it was known as orichalcum, and to the ancients, its appreciation value was equal to that of gold. So it was not only appealing to the eye, it had a sensual quality, mm-hmm. and it was very expensive to them, more or less. It was a valued commodity.
So Joe, so prior to this shipwreck that they just recently discovered and recovered these materials from, had anyone ever seen any actual orichalcum before, or was this just an idea that had yet to be substantiated?
To my understanding, this is the first modern-day scientific claim to the rediscovery of orichalcum. So to my understanding, they have nothing to compare it to.
Right.
And my understanding goes back a long way with this topic, but more or less they really don't have anything to compare it to, but a lot of early writings. I believe that they are trying to associate this metal with that due to the shipwreck and being that it's a strange alloy, because at this time we were still very primitive with metals. We were able to gold plate with metals, but not worldwide. Just because we accomplished it didn't mean it was something we were practicing globally.
I see that in the chat room, Patrick K. English said it was reddish, if I remember. And
correct.
Okay, so that's the idea. And you and I were discussing this.
It did have a reddish quality. He's absolutely right.
And you and I, when we were discussing this last week, me being a complete newcomer to this idea, I said to you at the time, I was like, well, if they've never had a sample of this before, then how do we verify what this is if there's nothing to compare it to? And you had started this conversation by saying that you were a bit dubious of it. And since then, I've seen other people say pretty much what you've said is like, well, wait a minute, this kind of seems like brass or something. This seems like a mixture of metals. And here's what I don't understand, Joe. How can they say that this is orichalcum? Really, how can they say that?
I'm with you 100%. In my opinion, scientifically, they don't even have a hypothesis, never mind anything proven. It is an alloy. Whether it's rare or not, I'm not sure. But it's an alloy of common mixtures, more or less, in our terms today. Yes, these were not the normal mixtures that would have been used. Copper and nickel. They were out of place metals is what happened on the ship. These were not, we don't find metal alloys of any type on ancient shipwrecks. If we do, it's minute. Mm-hmm. They really weren't we don't think that they were really working with so many alloys for particular purposes. It was usually for armor, for industrial purposes, or sword, but it wasn't making alloy metal ingots and bars for what appeared to be some sort of trade. This was, they believe, was a merchant ship, and it had this alloy on there, which they assumed was a prized commodity. And I could only assume that because they haven't found anything like this before, and with the dating of the ship, they must have said, hey, we have a good chance of this being this Orichalcum. But as Patrick English in a chat room said, I do not believe the description from this modern discovery included it being red.
Well,
not the shining red that Plato describes.
Mm-hmm.
You know, he gives a description of a metal where you say, wow, yeah, I've never seen that before. To be more specific, when I learned about it from my teacher years ago, he described it as something that they don't even know if it was real. You know, like Plato's describing something that we don't know if he's trying to put onto us something beyond the physical realm that we know of. You know, so it was almost an allegory of sense because there was no interpretation for it. We have nothing to refer it to. More or less, 90% or more of the references we have to Orichalcum outside of Plato are references to Plato. So it's very rare that we hear of this element to begin with. And I find it very, very impressive that they could be able to put such a claim on it as being Orichalcum.
Let me pose this question then. You mentioned that this is a merchant ship, and they date it back. They estimate this ship is from 600 BC. Mm-hmm. Question A, whose ship was this? And B, do you think this is more of a publicity stunt? Obviously, they've found something that's quite old, but to say that it's Orichalcum and that it is a Atlantean metal, I mean, that, brother, that's going for the big headlines.
No doubt.
I get the feeling that they knew that this is an odd substance, but let's just go out and say it's Orichalcum right now so that we can get as many headlines as possible and potentially increase our
and let's fit Atlantean in there somewhere.
Yeah, I mean, hey, that gets people's attention.
Absolutely. Come on. You know, that's you put that in your searches. Yeah, that's a top one. People love the topic.
Because you know a lot more about this than I, but when you were first telling me the story and I had seen it, and I didn't actually read too much on it initially because I just couldn't take it seriously.
Right.
And then when you and I started discussing it, it just seemed like, wow, that is a huge statement to make. And then the more that you told me about it, I'm like, well, wait a minute. First thing, it sounds like they don't have anything to compare this to. They have stories. And then when they mentioned the 4 or 5 different metals that were in this, it just sounds, I mean, listen, it's still a very interesting find. I'm not saying not. But, yeah, to make the jump to Atlantean Orichalcum, that's a big jump.
It is a big jump. I know also in the Mediterranean right now, off of the islands off of Greece, where they originally found, just over 100 years ago, the Antikythera Mechanism.
Yes.
I know that was an off-limits diving site since the 50s. I know sponge divers found it approximately around 1900.
Why was that off? Why was that off? Why could people not go there?
Well, that's protected by the Greek government. It's illegal to dive on that site, and they want
to because it's a heritage site.
It is because they want to just keep everything the way it is until they could raise everything properly. However, my conspiracy theories kick in, but here's how I
know where you're going. Bring it, brother. Bring it.
Well, I mean, honestly, for a number of years now, the Antikythera Mechanism, they feel that is BC times. My personal opinion is that this site, we haven't been allowed to dive on that site, and they've really haven't released any new information on this in some time is because I feel quite confident that everything that was on that shipwreck, including all of the beautiful marble statues from antiquity, my personal opinion is that shipwreck was from the 1460s. That's my personal opinion.
Okay.
I know in that area there was 3 ships that set sail when Constantinople fell, when the Byzantine Empire fell, which was the emperor then would have not only still been speaking Greek because that was their language, but he would have called himself the emperor also. They were not recognizing the emperors, the Holy Roman Church installed starting with Charlemagne. So they've had an emperor line for 2,700 years at this point. They were the Roman Empire. They were the Roman emperors, and that's what they would have told you. And when Constantinople was under attack, it's known that they loaded up a few ships with high-valued antiquities, things that they prized, their museum pieces, their statues, all these. And the story goes that in the 1460s, off of some of those little Grecian islands, there was a little town known as Mistra, kind of after the Mithridates. And right off of that little island in the 1460s, that was the last holdout. When Constantinople fell, the de facto ruling family members of the Byzantium Empire, that's where they were for the next 20, 30 years. But they had to flee from there as well. And they loaded up 3 ships. And it was historically, those 3 ships were met at combat right there off the coast. And that they went down with an attack by Greek fire, the legendary Greek fire, that the Roman attack ships engulfed these ships from these last holdouts of the Byzantine Empire, nailed them with Greek fire on an on-sea battle, and that they went down there. And when people say this Antikythera mechanism, how could it be so old? Well, it could be. It sure could be. But it would fit right in this time because all of the gears that are involved in that, these guys were already doing all of that. And all of their books exist of all of these gears. And all of those gears in that Antikythera mechanism, that whole entire thing is nothing but a box containing all of the revolutionary movements of all of the planets around our sun. It's really all it is. If you took every planet and gave it a gear and gave every one of its moons a gear working in the opposite direction of proportionate sizes, that's exactly what we would have.
Okay, wait, hold on, Joe. Let me make sure I've got this right. So you're saying that you do not believe that it is a anomalous ancient device.
No, not at all.
You believe that it could have been manufactured in that time and that it is for navigation or for astronomical uses.
Absolutely, 100%. I think it's for both, for navigation and for astronomy. But Understood. This is why that box, if it were reversed, see what it does is, as time goes on, it basically has a needle, an arm, a pointer that sticks out of the back, and if it was an Etch-a-Sketch, it would leave a line. But in this case, it doesn't leave a line. It's just if you could just follow that little arm that moves around on the back. More or less what it does, Michael, is it's 2 spirals, one on top of the other, going in opposite directions. And if you were to speed this thing up, 1,000 times and watch this arm, move 100 years in 10 seconds, it would just continuously make figure eights, just as
interesting. Just
as we know of above, so below. But all of the gears would fit in with all of our planets and all of the moons because the gears, the planets move one way, the moons rotate the opposite.
So to be clear, because I'm looking at one of the questions in the chat room, what we're discussing here, just so I don't remember who mentioned this, but I think somebody was mistaken. They thought that we were saying that the Orichalcum and the Antikythera were found on the same boat. They were 2 different boats at 2 different times.
Yeah, I jumped over to the Antikythera mechanism when you proposed the question, why would they make such an outrageous claim? Because currently, right now, at this moment, they are rediving on that site. where the Antikythera Mechanism was.
Well, speaking of strange
And so
items,
they might not want a lot of activity there because they actually had to build this incredible suit. Like it looks like a space suit, but it's really like a robotic suit that a person can go into, and they could go down and walk on the Mediterranean seafloor where this wreck is.
What depth is this at?
I believe it's only like 100 feet.
Okay, not bad.
But I believe that with this suit, it has like this new up-to-date rebreather, but it has everything's very articulated. So it's a new suit of its kind where basically this diver could go down there on the bottom and he could spend a full day working down there and not have to come up, which is different. It was completely designed for a number of years now just for this dive, just for the shipwreck with the Antikythera Mechanism.
Amazing.
So I've been really waiting to hear what more comes up from it, because I've seen 100 statues that have come from it, and from all over the ancient world, we pull up statues made of granite and marble out of the seafloor all the time, and they're beautiful. These that are pulled up, they're destroyed, and they say that the salt water's really eating them up. These things are destroyed like they were been in fires. I mean, they're really, really destroyed, like they're in bad shape.
So they were probably destroyed before they went underwater.
Well, you know what? You see, with the legend of the Greek fire is that, let's say it wasn't a marble statue. If this Greek fire substance did hit this a marble statue, it would continue to burn even if it did go underwater. So it's quite possible.
Wait. Okay. You're saying, first of all, I wasn't aware that marble could burn.
Right. Well, it can't. But it's the Greek fire, it's known as this, it's a very thick substance, probably.
So we're not even talking about fire. We're talking about a chemical process.
It's a great example would be a flamethrower of those days, but we've lost this recipe for Greek fire. We know of it in antiquity from many stories of it, that it was used in this battle or in that battle, but we've lost the recipe how to make this Greek fire.
So, and we know for a fact that this exists, or is this legend?
Yeah, it existed, and actually, right within arm's reach, I have Da Vinci's notebook, and he writes about it a great deal too. Actually, as far as I know, he might even give the best description, at least the closest into what its ingredients might be, but not to how to produce it. But it did have to deal with some petroleum and some straw and a bunch of other things. But as Patrick English says in the chat room, it was a resin weapon. It was like something that they would eject like an oil or a resin, and when it hit something, it would stick to it and burn, and they wouldn't be able to put it out. So it was great in warfare with the boats, with the ships, because you hit the ship with it and it's going to go down. Wow. And it was used for a number of years. But again, that's something that's lost in history, which is quite shocking, because it was only just a couple of 100 years ago that it was, like in Da Vinci's time. He was, when he was writing about it, he was writing about it as if everyone knew it, as if it was a commonplace. And it's weird that we've lost that recipe, but people have been looking for that thing for a long time.
Well, you pointed out something earlier today also that I wanted to touch on briefly. I saw this on your Facebook page, and this is, let's talk about this for a bit. It's this, the title of the article is Oldest Globe to Show the Americas Discovered. And, everyone's heard of the Pierre Reese map, but I've never heard about this globe. And tell our audience a little bit about this.
I would love to. This globe is absolutely fantastic. There's a few early globes that are out there. We have some going back to the 1500s, and some of them are absolutely fantastic. Now, this globe that we're going to discuss here, and I'm going to put the link in the chat room.
Please do.
And for all of you at home that are not in the chat room, this would be an excellent time for you to get in there.
Indeed.
So what really caught my attention was this globe popped on the scene about a year and a half ago, and
this is the first that I've heard about it.
Well, it's gone through a lot of tests to try to date it, to try to
And to
really
verify
come
its
up with.
authenticity?
Yeah, well, see, it's such an incredible work that not just the claims that see the earliest map that we have showing South America would be the map that's even titled America, and it's in the U.S. Continental Congress Library right now. It was made in 1507 in Venice, and it's a beautiful map. It's the earliest map claiming the New World as a continent, or even more so, claiming it to be the New World. It was the first map depicting that as the New World. So this globe here, they dated to approximately 1504, maybe 1503. Probably comes from Florence or Venice also, so from that same area as the other map. But this globe has so many fantastic qualities. It's engraved fully with continents, water, islands, and waves, and I must add, engraved remarkably for 1504. Even for today, the engravings on there are absolutely fantastic.
So this is made out of 2 ostrich eggs?
That's absolutely. It was made from 2 bottom halves. You know, the bottom half of an egg is more round than the top half. And this was made from 2 bottoms put together quite well, considering 500 years old. And, yeah, the engravings are remarkable. The fact that it's made from 2 ostrich eggs are pretty cool. Now, I'll tell you where this grabs me, because you know me, Michael. This is falling in a region, the area where I love to study. Now, there's only a few people in the world then who could engrave to such quality. There's only a few people still today that can do this. And now, I want to point out, if this person did carve this, did engrave this in 1504 in Florence or Venice, I have a couple questions. 1503 would have been the year Amerigo Vespucci tells us he found a continent known as the New World. So this would have had to have been immediately after that. Secondly,
because they think that it was made around 1504.
Right, exactly. And this is when he would have just been arriving back within months. This globe here, also for the continent of South America, has Novus Mundus, which means in Latin that's the New World. So this would be the first depiction of the New World as well. Secondly, what we have is in the area of North America, it's just depicted as a few islands.
Right.
It says in Latin, well, in English, here's where the dragons are.
Which is interesting in and of itself.
Which is very interesting. It's here are the dragons. So that's, the dragons are there. Another key feature, which I'm going to put, that this most likely could be someone who knew Vespucci or in that time, also where South America is, written in Latin. It says the land of our Holy Cross. Excuse me. Vespucci writes in that letter from that time, because that would have been Vespucci's 3rd voyage. In the first 2 voyages, he doesn't mention anything about the New World. In the 3rd voyage, not only does he mention a New World, but he mentions the area which is known today as Brazil. And when he's in that area, he mentions quite specifically on how he's able to sit there in port, or right off the coast in such a steady water, and he's able to now look at the constellations of the southern hemisphere as opposed to looking at them from the northern hemisphere. And what he's grateful about is that he's able to measure the stars from the little motion of the boat, in getting degrees and measurements. And when he was a little more at sea, the boat's moving around a little bit. It's hard to get measurements, but a lot of the times the waves right in front of him were blocking things just low on the horizon, which was necessary just as you're, heading into the southern hemisphere. So he was real grateful to be in that area, because he wrote about how happy he was able to see the Southern Cross in the sky, which hadn't been seen, in the Northern Hemisphere for centuries. I believe the last time it was able to be seen from Europe was around 400 AD. And a lot of the early Christian writings are based on the Southern Cross, the Southern Crux, or cross, if you will. But this is also why the Southern Crux is on Brazil's flag. It's on a lot of flags of most countries in the Southern Hemisphere, excluding Africa. The Southern Crux, you'll find those stars on Australia's flag, and quite a number of other ones also in the Southern Hemisphere. So to bring it back around, Vespucci in 1503 was in that area, and he was writing about the Southern Crux and writing about it being a new world. He writes that it's a new world. He literally used the same words, novus mundus, and he says it's a new world because our ancestors have never written anything about this. They've never seen anything like this. We've never seen or heard of animals like we see here. And it goes on and on. So there's only a few people that really could have carved such a thing. And now it brings me back to it here. If I were in Florence or Venice at that time and wanted to create this globe, there were so many other materials that you could have used that could have been made into a spherical form for you. Besides this, a copper ball, a copper sphere, very common.
So what does that mean? Hello?
Yeah, I'm here. I'm quite suspicious that it might have been someone, from Venice or Florence, but it's quite possible this might have been done away from home, maybe on voyage, maybe for voyage. I don't understand the use of the ostrich eggs, Michael. That's the only thing that's got me held up, because the scientific instruments of this time are greater than what most people know. For instance, I really don't like using Columbus because I go on and on about Columbus's story is really just fiction. Where in Columbus's story, he writes, when I did this, we didn't have telescopes, we didn't have instruments, we didn't have anything. And I say, well, that's why Columbus didn't find crap, because Vespucci writes, I have a telescope, I have a sextant, I have a quadrant, and I know how to use them better than anyone on the whole earth. And I could show anyone how to use them, and I could go anywhere on the whole earth that sailors can't, because sailors can only go where they've gone before. I could go anywhere that I could see a star. And he writes it real clear. So for these guys in these circles he was in, Vespucci was friends with this guy, Bam, from Germany, who created the first globe, the first sphere. And he created a round Earth as a model that we know of today as a globe in the 1460s. Another kickback to that the world wasn't flat. So it just really...
Okay, so here's a question
I have great appreciation to it, but I'm quite curious as to why it was made on such a delicate, organic instrument such as an eggshell that, I can only imagine engraving on the eggshell. He couldn't have got it on just 2 eggs.
Okay, so check this out. I 2 ideas. I have never been around a nesting ostrich. So I cannot verify the strength or non-strength of a ostrich egg. Now, a person in the comments below, and this person says that they are from the University of Glasgow. They address the whole egg idea, and they're saying, quote, this person is Simon Bernard from the University of Glasgow. He says, you generally need a center punch to even open one of these giant eggs, hence the reason they were used for this purpose. Now, I cannot verify that, but that's perhaps. But another question that I have is the phrase, where do they say, here are dragons.
Right, here are the dragons. Yeah,
now,
here are the dragons.
So, and that's in the general area of, God, I can't really tell. Is this just the northern part of South America? Is this Central America?
It would be like where southeastern United States would be, but
Right.
but it's not showing a continent. It's just showing islands. But again,
And
we had not explored that.
Understood. So here's what I'm thinking. I'm wondering, and I put it to you since you've studied these people, I'm wondering if that is merely a phrase to signify the idea when we say, here be dragons, they're saying, here are the dragons. I'm wondering if even then they are saying that a little bit in jest, meaning that this is completely unexplored. It doesn't mean that there are literally dragons here or
Right.
that the dragons signify anything. I'm asking you, would that be out of character on an item like this to say something?
It would be fair. It would be fair. I would also suggest that maybe being that it was relatively unexplored, well, they must have had some knowledge of it being there, that some land bodies to depict islands. But
Right.
If their proportions were off a little bit, and which could be, being that South America is a little out of proportion, and I should mention that they do show South America as a complete continent, which hadn't been explored yet, the other side on this one. But however, if that was out of proportion a little bit, and instead of where I was saying earlier, Southeast U.S., if that was more Central America, like Mexico, on those pyramids,
There's iguanas.
there's dragons,
Yes.
even in stone.
That's true.
They do have stonework with dragons.
It's a iguanal.
Yeah. So, I do have to wonder about that. But again, I feel that there was a knowledge of land over this way, and it was really just who had the gall, and I think what really it came down to was it was just such horrific times in Europe, heading into the late 1400s, that people they had to find somewhere else to go.
And they didn't feel like they had much to lose.
No, they didn't. I mean, people were, millions were being killed every year. The closer to 1500 it was getting worse every year.
Well, I'm looking at the clock. I know that we're going to be coming up on our messages anytime.
You are good.
And ladies and gentlemen, we're going to be back in just a moment. My name is Michael Parker. I'm speaking with my good friend Joe Kiernan. And when we come back, we're going to get into a little bit of demonology. And so we will see you on the other side. Hang tight. Greetings, truth seekers, paradigm busters, new world orders, civil disobedience, freedom fighters, free thinkers, higher mammals, good people of all types. How's it going? My name is Michael Parker, and this is hour 2 of the Electric Pyramid, and this is episode 31. I'm here with my good friend and producer Joe Kiernan, and we were supposed to have Stephen A. LaChance on tonight. He is an author who had experienced some extremely intense demonic possessions, and I've been reading his book, and frankly, it just completely creeped me out. I can talk about extraterrestrials and conspiracies all day, but when it comes to this, it just really bugs me, and in a negative way. But I was hoping that he was going to be on here so that I could ask him some questions. So, Stephen, wherever you are, we hope that you're doing okay, and we will look forward to hopefully having you on in the future at some point. Next week, bar any situations, the whole idea for 3 weeks in January was we were going to have, paranormal kind of ghost hunter type authors, all from Llewellyn, which is a publishing company that I enjoy a great deal. And they were kind enough to hook me up with some books and some guests. So bar any strangeness, next week we are going to be speaking with Debbie Chestnut, and I hope that she's on because this one looks really interesting. She's a psychic medium. She is a paranormal investigator, and the book that she is currently that we'll be talking about is The Most Chilling Experiences of a Paranormal Investigator. Let me just read you a little bit about it. It says, join psychic medium and paranormal investigator Debbie Chestnut as she explores 12 terrifying true encounters with ghosts, dark beings, and negative entities. Discover an abandoned house of horrors that becomes more evil with every victim it claims. Follow a tortured spirit trapped in a forsaken mirror. Feel the savage pain of a distraught spirit that screams out in agony. Take a macabre journey through the unhappy realms of the astral plane. I hope that she makes it on here. I would love to hear about this. Shortly, we're going to queue up a interview with a man, John Zaffis, who many of you, I'm sure, will have heard of. And John Zaffis was involved in the Stephen A. LeChance investigation. And so we would have been talking about him had Stephen been on, but we do have this interview that you'll be hearing shortly. And I'd like to tell you guys, you can also hear this interview on my YouTube page. And if you guys haven't checked out my YouTube page, I ask that you do, and Joe's as well, because we both put a lot of content on there. I think I have about 40 videos at this point. And I have a playlist of all the Electric Pyramid shows that that Joe has put together. And I also have a lot of videos from my previous show, Dark Matter, which I did from 2006 to 2008. So I hope that you guys will check that out, because there's a lot of stuff on there. Please come take a look, take a listen, subscribe. And Joe, what is the name of your YouTube? What does it go under? Is it just Joe Kiernan? Perhaps Joe is away from the microphone for a second.
Me, Michael?
Joe, are you there? Joe, can you hear me?
I do hear you.
Okay.
You didn't hear me?
No, I didn't.
That was very...
I hear you now.
All right, that's very important. I thought I muted myself, but I was not even muted.
Well, last week, when we came back from the break, I had the mute on, and then you had to start talking for me because I didn't realize I was still muted. But ladies and gentlemen, we're punk rock here. We're doing this, we're shooting from the hip. And,
but more or less, Michael, my YouTube page is Joe Kiernan.
All right. Yes. Well, ladies and gentlemen, please visit Joe Kiernan's page on YouTube, and please visit mine. Mine is just Michael Parker Media, because we, like I say, we do this because we love to do it, and I hope that you guys check it out. I hope that you subscribe, and that's why we do it. So next week, hopefully, Debbie Chestnut will be on. We'll be talking about her book, Stalking Shadows, The Most Chilling Experiences of a Paranormal Investigator. And I've got to tell you, seriously, you guys, I don't dwell too much on the whole ghost demon thing, because frankly, it freaks me out, man. The extraterrestrial hypothesis is something that I am more knowledgeable about, and also it just doesn't give me the creep factor that the supernatural does. But I was looking forward to having Stephen on, and he could have told you more, but perhaps that will happen in the future. So before the break, we were still talking about the globe that was made out of the ostrich eggs, and we will stay on top of that story. And Joe and I are both very interested in the history of mankind, and hopefully getting to the bottom of what the real history is. And one of the things I have to say about my friend Joe is that I like to think that we bring different things to the table. And one of the things that I really enjoy about Joe is his vast knowledge of art history, and this history of, people like Ficino, which frankly, I just did not know that much about. So I've learned a lot from this endeavor, and I hope that you guys do as well. And Joe, you've been very educational to me in that respect.
Thank you very much, Michael. It's a two-way street, though, buddy.
No, well, I appreciate that, and that's why we do the show, guys, because we're friends, and we're both just curious people, and I love learning new things, and it's just weird, man. I'm not gonna say how old I am, you guys, but I'm old, and it was only Joe that has kind of recently gotten me interested in these subjects. It's, I've always been interested in the UFO subject and popular culture and art and the paranormal, but it's only recently that, Joe's giving me a lot of education really quickly. And
Thank you very much, Michael.
Yeah, it's true.
That means a lot to me. Thank you very much.
It's true, and I know that you do the same for our audience. So yeah, we're going to stay on top of these stories because, ladies and gentlemen, I guarantee you that eventually the truth will come out. And when you were talking about the area where people couldn't dive, the thing that was going on in my mind is also, they've got to cover for themselves. And when I say they, I just mean the status quo. Mm-hmm. If they start pulling out a lot of things quickly where they I don't think that they are opposed to rewriting history books, but they want to control the pace at which they do it. What do you think of that?
I think you're right on, because I think a lot of the things that we're looking for, historical or even just answers, the daily meaning of things, I think a lot of this has already been found and has been taken from us. So that's really a lot of that drives me in history, is that the answers are there. They've been taken from us, but they still exist. They're just in bits and pieces and people's commentaries and history, and it exists. But unfortunately, I just feel a lot has been taken from us from history.
Agreed.
And if it's been figured out once, it can be done again.
I agree.
That's just how I feel about it, and I feel there's a lot that we could learn from what we have already, and I think that we are confused. We all know that something's missing. We ask so many questions on just the basic why. Why am I here? What's my purpose? What are we supposed to be doing? Or in relation to a lot of religious texts, even, if you will. I mean, there's so many interpretations of them. It's what was it originally? What could it have been? What was the foundation of these texts or ideas? Mm-hmm. And because we hear a lot of these today, and we with common sense we say, I don't know about that. Something doesn't quite sound right about that. And more or less, usually along the way, things have been changed a little bit, and usually for the wrong reasons. And I'd really like to. I get a big kick out of pulling back the curtain whenever I can, even if it's just a little peek.
That is our purpose
yes,
here.
Sir.
You guys like you and I, and the people in this chat room right now. I mean, we are all in this together, and I used to wonder, like, well, how are people not interested in these subjects? How is this not as interesting to them as it is to me? And to a certain extent, I was underestimating other people because I thought that there weren't that many people that were interested in these subjects. And the longer that I do this, the more that I find that, there are actually a lot of people who are interested in these subjects. It's just that, when you go to a bar or you go to a sporting event or you go to school or whatever, a lot of times people are, they're a bit guarded with these types of subjects because they don't want people to misunderstand them. And they also know, I think, or feel that if I have to start explaining this, then people are going to go, we're bored. We think you're nuts or whatever. So I guess all I'm saying is there are people like us. There's a lot of people like us. And if you're listening to the show or you're in this chat room, there's a lot more of us out there.
There is. I mean, this is why we have freedom slips. I mean, people come here for the truth, and we try to give it in whatever perspective we can.
It's funny because I'm reading over some of the things in the chat room, and when I went on here earlier, there was a previous show that I wish that I had heard, but I was preparing for this show and I was having dinner with my family. And they were talking about Alfred I can't even remember. I can't pronounce the man's last name. Because I've actually interviewed him before. And one thing that I will say, and this is not a slam him are other people, and I think they're talking about Karen Hughes as well. I kind of feel post-conspiracy these days. And what I mean by that is, yes, almost everything in one way or another is a conspiracy, but only in the terms that right now Joe and I are conspiring to entertain you guys and inform you. And so I'm not saying that conspiracies do not exist, but having been in this game for quite a long time, I am beginning to dial down the amount of people that I put a lot of stock in what they had to say. And I only say that because, how can I put this? You know, when you listen to your internal compass and you know when something, that just doesn't sound right. I'm not buying that. And a lot of the information that's out there in conspiracy world and paranormal world, I'm not saying that it is not true, but yeah, thank you, Patrick. Alfred Lebremont Weber. I hope I'm saying his name. I actually interviewed him on Dark Matter back in like 2008 or something. And I guess all I would say is, and believe me, I love the ideas of people living inside the earth or this, that, or the other thing. And at one point I took it all in, every phenomenal story. I took it all in, from the reptilians to Looking Glass, to whatever amazing story was out there. I took it in, rolled it around in my head, thought about it. And I guess what I'm saying now is that I'm kind of moving away from that. And what I'm looking for now is solutions and ways forward, which is not to deny that there are people out there up to no good. But I am saying that I think there is a lot of information that just frankly hasn't panned out. And I don't know. I mean, these days when I'm looking for people to interview, I am a lot more picky. And there was a UFO person that I interviewed back in 2006. Wonderful guy, very charming, fun guy. And I think back on some of the stories that he told me at that time. And at the time I was like, okay, well, I'll listen to that. But these days I think it's quite improbable.
Well, I love good theories, I don't mind hearing a good theory, but
a theory is different than a story.
No doubt about it at all. And I do like how you've been bringing people on that have been bringing facts and evidence and conclusions, and it is a nice change from theories. Don't get me wrong. I mean, we need theories to solve any problem. That's where we have to begin. But I'm just having a hard time because
well, let me say this:
proof fun stuff, man.
Same here. And one of the things that I like that I've this show has brought me is just like our conversation just a few minutes ago. I did not know until talking to, and Joe and I, ladies and gentlemen, we've known each other for a while, but we live on two different sides of the U.S. We didn't see each other for a long time, so I did not know the depth of Joe's knowledge on certain subjects. And one of the things that has been very interesting to me is when we were talking about the Antikythera device earlier, you're saying that they actually had the ability to create these kind of things. This wasn't something that was ceded to us necessarily by an off-world intelligence. We could have made these things, and that's something I didn't know. And actually,
absolutely,
it makes sense to me.
Sure. I mean, they had all those gears all worked out. I mean, it wasn't too long after that at all that they were making gears very similar to all of that on a minuscule scale, and thus became timepieces, and watches. And as you know, in Germany and Switzerland, beginning in the 1500s, they were really producing timepieces with small watches. And pocket.
Well, I find that exciting because listen, now we're talking about something that we've got some data here that we can prove. And listen, I love to watch Ancient Aliens. It's a lot of fun, and I love to have my brain expanded. But at the same time, if Joe has got some stories like Michael, hold on, listen. You know what? They actually were doing certain, and I'm not saying I know how they built the pyramids or any edifices like that. But when you were talking about Da Vinci and some of the things that he was creating, all I'm putting out there is I love learning new things. And sometimes we have to revise our ideas about what we think is mysterious when we find that there are actually answers that can provide a logical flowchart of progress. And I'm also not picking on anybody, but I will say that, there's a lot of stuff on the internet that I was more open to at one point when I was just eating up all information that I possibly could. And that is not to say that groups like the Bilderbergers do not exist or things like that, or the Council on Foreign Relations or the Trilateral Commission or whatever you want to call it. And certainly there are people in smoky boardrooms that are making decisions that you and I will never, ever be a portion of. But
maybe a victim of, but
a victim of, yes. But I guess what I'm saying is I don't want people to think that they are powerless against that. And sometimes I have to question the information that I'm hearing from people that I once was interested in. I don't know. I'm just the older I get, the more skeptical I get. And some people that know me would say, Parker, you have never been skeptical. Are you kidding me?
Just getting wiser.
I think that's it. I think that's it. So hopefully with this show and, when I bring on people, there are some people that I'm bringing on to be thought provoking. And there are some people that I really do think have the goods. And even if they don't have the entire story, they have a portion of the story. But when it gets to global intrigue and extreme vast conspiracies, then I think we have to dial it down a little bit. And so I'm just putting it out there because that's just my personal feeling as I go forward. And I know that I'm not, I know the Loose Change guys, they're friends, and we've had similar discussions that, not everything is a conspiracy. Some things are just things that happen that out of incompetence or out of a business deal. So I don't know. I'm rambling now, but I just wanted to float that out there. And, but you know what? Let's move forward. Joe, I did want to play a bit of this Zaffis interview because it's really interesting. And can we roll with that a little bit? This was John Zaffis, who many of you may know. He's a very famous paranormal investigator. And basically, he was schooling me on the whole idea of how to deal with demons and hauntings and spirits. And this is one of the most famous, well, not famous, one of the most popular interviews that I've done. So I was wondering if we could roll a little bit of that, please.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I'm looking forward to it. Let's get into it, buddy.
Let's do this.
It's weird because with demons, there's so many different forms of religion. And oftentimes when I've thought about demons, I didn't want to think about it too heavily. I've mentioned on the show before that I've had friends who've read the Necronomicon and things of that nature, and I kind of actually didn't want to get involved with it. I do not have any form of oracles in my house that I use. Basically, I want to be very careful when I'm dealing with subjects of this nature. That you don't want to unwittingly invite things into your home using Ouija boards or something like that. So it's something that I take seriously, and it's a fascinating subject, and we're going to learn a lot about it. As we speak, my producer, Jerry Belmont, is getting our guest on the phone, Mr. John Zaffis. He's, like, as I said, he's been in the business for 30 years, and he's been on so many different radios, television shows. It's almost kind of ridiculous to even mention it because he is such a foreigner, well-known specialist on this subject. I mean, he's been on Discovery Channel. He's been on George Noory. He's been on many different radio shows and television shows. This is his first appearance on our show. You can find him on the web at johnzaffis.com. That's JOHNZAFFIS.com. That's johnzaffis.com. You can also find him online at PRSNE.com, which is the Paranormal Research Society of New England. And you can find him on MySpace as well, which is myspace.com/John Zaffis. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome to the show Mr. John Zaffis. Johnny, with us?
I'm here, buddy. How you doing?
I'm doing very well. Thanks for coming on the show today.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Hey, I've been reading a lot about you over the last couple of days, and all good and all fascinating. And I've got to take my hat off to you. I mentioned before you came on, it's the study of demonology. I mean, there's a lot of things that I've touched upon in the show, which I haven't talked about. Well, this is a subject that we haven't done a lot of on the show, but I've had a lot of interest expressed by listeners to do a show on this subject, and you are on the short list of people that we wanted to get to come on here. And I guess one of the first things I wanted to start out with is I've been reading your bios and looking at the web pages and studying you, but for our listeners who may not know your work, kind of tell us how you got involved with this. And I know that you did at a pretty young age.
Yeah, about 16 or 17 years old when I really took an interest in it because I had a sighting. And today I've come to realize that was my grandfather at the foot of the bed. I was 15, 16 years old, had that experience, and you got to remember, I grew up around the paranormal. I've never had any experiences prior to that. And after studying it and getting involved with it, that made me look at it differently. And the more I got involved, the more stories you hear, the more, and then you start talking to people and going to, haunted locations. And then I took it a step farther and started doing investigations and, did that for several years. Then I took it a step farther, almost 21 years ago, where I started studying the demonology aspect of the paranormal field.
Mm-hmm.
And the biggest reason was I wanted to know if it was for real. Do people get possessed? Do these things occur? Do they happen? I never seen it, never experienced it. So I just really started delving into it at that point in time. And with all of that, growing up, like I said, part of being in the paranormal realm, so to speak, it was a very difficult thing because my Uncle Ed Warren did everything he could to basically keep me out of it.
I'm sure.
He did not want me getting involved with it, but I would drive him nuts. I'd drive him crazy. And finally, it reached a point where he just sat me down one day, down in what's referred to as his Halloween room, and just went into the in-depth conversation with me. He goes, John, it doesn't run around with, a tail and hooves and horns. He goes, it doesn't appear that way. It stays in the background. It doesn't like to be exposed. He says it will always affect friendships. It will affect your family, your environment. It will affect things that you don't even understand. You cross that line and you start getting involved with this, they said it will always remember who you are, and you're never going to be able to walk away from this. It will always remember you, and it will always try to retaliate. I mean, the conversation was a lot more in depth, but I remember him looking across back at me, and he goes, "What do you think, kid?" And I go, "I'm not worried about it."
Wow.
And he goes, "I am." He goes, "You're my blood. You're my nephew." And he said, "I don't want to have to deal with my sister if anything happens to you."
So were you about, 25 at this point when you had this conversation and started to look, or was this right off the bat? I mean, after you had the initial visitation by your grandfather at the foot of your bed, how long was it before you had this conversation with your uncle?
It was 20 years ago. So let's see, about 30.
Okay.
About 29 years old, 30 years old when I actually started getting involved, just studying the demonology end of it.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a fortunate part that encompassed a lot, because reading up on it, back then we didn't have the internet or anything.
Right.
So you got your hands on anything you possibly could. And that's when I started taking it a step farther, talking to people that were involved with it, a lot of different clergy people. I started getting exposed and understanding it. And it was, a while before I actually got involved with going on actual demonic cases. So I was fortunate, I think, because I learned something, I didn't realize it at the time, that, learning things and understanding things before you jump into them is one of the best things you can do.
Agreed.
Does it still prepare you? Oh, heck no.
Yeah.
Because you still do not know what you're going to come up against once you start delving into it. But once you do, and you start realizing what some of these people go through, it just makes you look at things from a totally different perspective.
Well, these days, is your work primarily, are you trying to primarily just help people rid their homes and workplaces of these types of spirits? What is your primary work at this point when dealing with demons and hauntings?
Today, it just takes me into that category with dealing with negative or demonic type situations or possession. I intermingle with a lot of the paranormal groups out there, a lot of different clergy all over the place. So my path actually took me down this road where I get involved mainly just with negative cases today.
Wow. And do you receive, a lot of email and calls each week? It seems like this subject has taken on a popularity. It's always had its place on the bookshelves of stores and the occasional television special, and occasionally you'd hear something about it on the radio or in the newspapers. But these days, it's very, very popular.
It's actually exploded.
Yes. So what would you do? You think there's more of this activity, or do you just think there's more knowledge of it amongst people and more curiosity about it?
I think it's a combination of a lot of different things. The radio shows, the TV shows, the exposure to the internet, the interest is at an all-time high. People are very interested and they're very curious. And people look at things a lot more openly today, I think, than they ever did before. In the U.S., we always kept this very shunned. It was very quiet. Mm-hmm. People really didn't talk about it. Where over in the other countries, it was things that were always discussed and always brought forth. But now, like I said, over the past year to 2 years, if you ever said something to me 5 years ago about seeing where demonology and these demon-type situations would be so much in the forefront, I would have never believed it.
Wow. Well, when I was doing some research on demons, because one of the first things that I was beginning to wonder about, I grew up in a kind of typical Protestant nature, and it's like I'm not an overtly religious person at this point. I'm a spiritual person, but I began to think, okay, well, what is the nature of demons? And how many are there? Where are they coming from? And one of the things that surprised me when I was reading some of the work about you is that, you would deal with folks in these religious fields, be it priests or bishops or whatever, and they would be preaching the gospel, 7 days a week. But when it came to the subject of actual demons, they weren't really believers in that part of it.
Well, we still have that stigma today, where a lot of your clergy members, and it's just not Roman Catholic, it's Protestant and rabbis, it goes right across the board, where when dealing with it on a negative perspective, a lot of them would rather not even go into that area. Mm-hmm. They want to focus more on the positive and not give it the amount of recognition that is happening today. But unfortunately, guess what? Times have changed. And a lot of these things are being brought out into the forefront, where this whole world has been so secretive for so many years. It's just so different and viewed so differently right now that it's just something that I'm still even coming to terms with, that it's so much more out in the forefront.
Excuse me. Well, it's interesting to me because if one is going to talk about God and the New Testament, the Old Testament, and things like that, and we're going to talk about a devil and these type of fallen angels or demons, then, I mean, in a way it doesn't surprise me, in a way it does, that some of these clergy folk would not really want to touch that subject initially. And I was kind of wondering if, are they afraid of it, which, rightly they should be, or are they thinking it's affecting their credibility, or are they just not wanting to go down that dark way?
Well, unfortunately, it's all of the above.
Okay.
And a lot of people, especially your clergy members, they're not prepared. And a lot of them, weren't trained in the degree of understanding what people go through if they have an infestation within their home or they're being oppressed with these types of situations, what they should do, how they should handle it.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a very difficult thing. I've seen ministers actually do deliverance and deliverance prayers and clearings where they're a lot more, let's say, knowledgeable, if you will, and willing to jump in and do those types of things than I've actually seen Roman Catholic priests do.
I was hoping that you could explain to our audience, because I was, for the past couple of days when reading about this, I'm finding a lot of information about demons, but based upon your 30 years in this field, could you kind of tell us what a demon is and what a demon is not, and what the difference between a demon and, say, just a ghost or apparition is?
Okay, I'll take the ghost apparition versus what a demon is.
Okay.
A ghost and apparition could have been a person. We call those human spirit, ghost, if you will, that could wander the earth, could come from a tragedy, a murder, suicide, these different types of souls, energy, or spirit, however you want to refer to it, could stay earthbound.
Mm-hmm.
And they could be lingering for unresolved issues, depending on, if it was a murder or something and they want that resolved. Battlefields and places like this. These are different types of areas that I refer to as human spirit. When we cross that line and we start talking in reference to deities or demons, these are the whole other area where when you refer to devils or demons or imps or anything like that, it's believed that they were cast out of heaven and, they fell by the wayside, didn't do what they were supposed to, according to a lot of the scriptures that have been written and the different things that have occurred with these. Mm-hmm. But I take that a step farther. When you're studying demonology, you can go back as far as recorded time goes, and your Egyptians, your pagans, and your different belief systems with all the different deities. So I look at this from a combination of thousands of years of the different types of things that people perceived on a negative level. And today I believe a lot of these things with the deities and the demons and some of what people call negative energy, and these things intertwine with each other, and a lot of them work with each other, causing a lot of the different things to occur and happen, especially more so today than ever before.
Is that because we are subject to so many stresses and abuses in our life? Do we, from what I understand from some of your writings, I mean, the purpose of the demon is to wear us down over time. Does that mean that maybe there's more of them now than before, or are we more prone to being victim to them today?
I think really all of the above.
Okay.
I do feel that there is more in the forefront than there ever was before. There's more recognition given. There's more different types of practices and doors open to bring these things forth, if you will. And with the culture and society, with a lot of things, do I feel that these different types of entities or deities can attract more towards people than they did in the past? Absolutely. And there's just a total way of looking at this on how these things are affecting people, what is happening, the controversy with different things. And there's another thing that I've studied over the years, too. I do believe these things do go in cycles. And it just seems like there's this different terminology and different points in time that your negative perspective of this type of activity and how it affects human beings seems to escalate. You know, it could be, some people refer to as 7 years, 12 years, 10 years, but you'll see where it can build up and you'll notice it and it will reach its climax, then things will calm back down. But in 30 years, I've never seen it to the point that it is right now.
Wow. That somehow that doesn't surprise me, but still that's a bit startling.
It is, and it's startling to me. And it's a fact of, you know, studying so many different things and being exposed to things and always hearing, you know, how so many things were interpreted in scriptures and things that were written, you know, hundreds and thousands of years ago. How scary it really is to see the parallels into what's happening in our world and to things that were written so many years ago. That's scary.
Yes, it is. Well, one of the things that I've heard from even people here in the studio, and people have asked me when they knew that I was going to do this show, is it's one thing for a fundamentalist Christian or person who is of a particular religious walk who believes in these types of things to exist. But what if I'm an agnostic or an atheist? Does the demon still have, I mean, I can guess what your answer may be, but we're curious, for a person whose belief system may not include demons, can the demon still affect that person who doesn't believe in the phenomena?
Okay, yes. Now, with this, when we're dealing with that, today, your organized religions are deteriorating. Not any particular one. All of them are deteriorating. And people are looking and searching beyond what we were brought up to believe in and interpret. When you're dealing with an individual, and this is continuous, where, you know, they have no organized religion, or a lot of people just don't believe in God, let alone devils and demons and all these other crazy things. But when they're affected and they got these things occurring and they're being attacked or they're being oppressed by certain information that's coming through to them, and once you're already ruled out as far as anything on a medical or a psychological perspective, you're left with what? You're searching and you're still looking. And I deal continuously with this, and people will talk to me, tell me what's happening with them. And a lot of times I'll make suggestions to them, you know, is it going to hurt to have your minister do prayers or a priest or a shaman to do prayers, and let's see if there's any difference. And a lot of times people say, well, there's nothing to lose by it. And with me, they're at least giving it, you know, the recognition and the opportunity to see that there could be something else that encompasses things. And many times people will say to me afterwards, John, now I got to rethink everything that I thought after going through all this.
I can see that. We're speaking with John Zaffis. We're talking about demonology, what they are, where they come from, how they affect us. And this is something that John, I have to admit, I have been reticent even to talk about this subject on the show before, because actually, I mean, I have a respect for it, and it does give me the creeps. So I'm learning along with the audience today. I guess one of the things that I would want to ask you is for a person who wants to guard themselves against oppression or eventual possession by a demon, what can one do to protect themselves and their family to try to fend off infestation by these entities?
one of your key things with any circumstances in a average type situation, always think positive, and always try to keep upbeat, and always look for the good within circumstances or within people. And that's a very hard thing for each and every one of us to do. But, and my philosophy is I'm a paranormal investigator / demonologist, and I study everything. And if a person worships a 10-pound quartz crystal, I don't care. They're doing it on a positive.
Right.
And that's a positive force that they're trying to bring forth. I always tell people, focus in on that. If you do have things that are starting to occur, because a lot of these things that people go through and the oppression state and things like that, we have to stand firm on what we believe in. We have to stand firm in what is happening with our lives. So I'm a very strong believer in that. You have to take control of a lot of these situations personally and within your home to be able to help to break, whether you want to call it negative, a demon, a deity, whatever you want to call it. You have to be fully united, if it's a family you're dealing with, to be able to do that, to help break things and be able to stand back up on your 2 feet. And when you're dealing with anything, in any circumstances, whether it's human spirit or something on a negative level, if you can't see it, you can't touch it, it's one of the most scariest things for people.
Well, one of the things that I read that I also found interesting, and you said this right off the bat, I mean, these things do not wander around with a forked tail or cloved hoof. I mean, they primarily operate in invisibility. And what do you notice first when a person comes to you and they say, John, I believe I may be being affected by a demonic entity? What are some of the common signs that you'll see initially that might make you say, okay, I think this person might seriously have a demonic issue?
The normal circumstances that we deal with is usually the infestation. And when we say the infestation, that's when the environment is being affected, the household or the business area. You can have where people are extremely tired, they're exhausted, they're not concentrating on anything, they can't eat, they can't function, their personalities are starting to change, they're getting these thought processes that are coming through that they normally don't. Their whole environment, what they're interested in watching and reading, a lot of these things can start to actually change with these individuals. And that should throw up a red flag with a person when they're like, okay, why is this occurring and why is that happening? Now, these are a lot of the times where we get involved in the beginning stages. But when it goes past that and you go into the oppressive state, that's when the person really has something that is really giving it a strong hold. It turns that person against their friends, their family members. They're continuously arguing. The thought process changes. They're getting a lot of information that's coming through to them in their dream state. And what it does is it basically tries to wear down that individual so that they're just to a point where they're giving in of their free will and just saying, fine, take me over, do whatever you want, just stop tormenting me. That's when usually people end up falling victim to what we call possession.
Well, I see that we're already getting some questions on the website, but I want to wait to ask you some of these. When we move from that area from oppression to possession, and I know that you have been part of many exorcisms, if I'm looking at a person who has moved from the realm of oppression into possession, what am I going to see differently in this person? What is it going to look like to me as an outsider? What is their behavior going to change into? What are they going to be doing at this point if they are possessed?
There are several different categories that people can witness. Sometimes they'll get information from the past, the present, and the future.
Wow.
they can talk in some of the most craziest languages that, sometimes you can't even figure out some of these things. An enormous amount of strength. That's one of the most common things I've ever seen.
Superhuman strength. They can lift and fight people off?
Yeah, like it's nothing whatsoever.
Mm-hmm.
These are just some of the characteristics that people witness. They can end up being bruised, bitten, and scratched in different areas where, they can't physically do it themselves. And when these things occur and these things start to happen, and these people are to that point where they can't figure out why it's happening and they're just so petrified, these are some of the things that we look for. And very seldomly do these things occur in front of large groups of people. It can be witnessed by one or two people.
Mm-hmm.
It's usually the people that are closest to them.
Yes.
Now,
ladies and gentlemen, my name is Michael Parker. This is the Electric Pyramid. You have been listening to an interview that I did with John Zaffis several years ago, and I must say that John is a really, really friendly, easygoing guy for dealing with such heavy matter. When I interviewed him, I thoroughly enjoyed it, and it went on for a while. If you would like to catch the balance of that interview, just go to my YouTube page, Michael Parker Media, and it is on there. And while we were doing that, first of all, we apologize for the sound issues. These things happen, ladies and gentlemen, when you're doing this kind of down and dirty from the street kind of broadcasting. But thanks for bearing with us. But while we were doing that, my man Joe found Da Vinci's recipe for the fire that we were discussing earlier. Let's hear about that.
Yeah, I do. I have from Da Vinci's notebooks, I have his recipe for Greek fire. He describes it twice, once casually, and this one I'm going to refer to. He has in his notes under naval warfare, which is quite interesting because he even describes about throwing poison from one boat to another in the form of a powder. That as soon as they breathe it in,
magnesium, perhaps.
As soon as they breathe it in, they become asphyxiated. He gives a little recipe for that as well. So in regards to Greek fire, excuse me, he says take charcoal of willow, and saltpeter, and aqua vita, and sulfur, pitch, with incense and camphor and Ethiopian wool. Boil them all up together. This fire is so eager to burn that it will run along wood even when it's underwater. You should add the mixture to liquid varnish, petroleum, turpentine, and strong vinegar, and mix everything together and dry it in the sun or in an oven with bread, and then lightly take it out, and then stick it round, hampen or towel, molding it to a round form and driving very sharp nails into every side of it. Leave, however, an opening in this ball to serve for a fuse. Then cover it with resin and sulfur. This fire, moreover, when fixed to the top of a long lance, which is a brachia long, if its point is covered with iron in the order that it may not be burnt, it is useful for avoiding and warding off the hostile ships in order not to be overwhelmed by their onset. Not bad. So he loosely gets into it, and that's probably the best description we have of it in antiquity. He really doesn't describe how much of each step to go through, but he more or less tells you everything that it's involved, and it's odd. It's an odd mixture. It sounds disgusting,
It does. Well, I'm glad you didn't go any further because we would probably have Homeland Defense breathing down our necks because we are, telling people how to create this Greek fire.
This is the mysterious Greek fire. People have been seeking out to recreate this for several hundred years.
Well, when you say it burns underwater, I mean, that blows my mind, and that's that's why I mentioned the magnesium.
In the other reference that I had mentioned to you, it says, basically that it's, I'll skim over it. It has the same ingredients and all of these elements should be put into a mixture and twisted in the shape of a ball, and the spikes. This is fire is called Greek fire, and it is a marvelous thing and sets fire to everything under the water.
Wow.
This was known to the Romans, to whom it was afterwards much employed, and especially by the Emperor Leo. When the Eastern peoples came against Constantinople with an infinite number of ships, they were all set on fire by this substance.
Amazing.
So it must have been quite impressive that they were able to, catapult or throw these hardened mass balls with fuses in them, and once these things started burning, there was no stopping it.
And who would have thought they would have had that at that time?
Yeah, I mean, they had much more.
I know.
You'd really be shocked. I think a lot of people out there would be shocked on how much we really had, because it's incredible. Where if someone just sat down and went through just Leonardo da Vinci's notebooks, I think they would be really amazed on what was every day then. Because we think of it, especially here as Americans, we think of like the 1800s as being ancient times. Everything was so primitive. But, in the year 1500, if you were in Europe in any civilization, it was really no different than today, lacking technology. I mean, records were kept on everything. There was still, the courts were different, but really, it really wasn't.
Higher mathematics had been created.
Well, yeah. I mean, if you had a problem with someone, it went to court, or if you had to collect money, it went to court, and it was really no different. I mean, people were no different then as they are today. We're just as intellectual as we are now.
Right. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I see that it is 10:55 here on the West Coast, and that means at any moment now, music will start playing. So I'm going to prep us to get out of here. Joe Kiernan, thank you as usual. To the audience, thank you. Chat room, thank you. And thank you for bearing with us during a few audio issues. And next week, like I said, Debbie Chestnut will be on here. We will be talking paranormal again. And so we hope you tune in. My name is Michael Parker. This has been the 31st episode of the Electric Pyramid. And I hope you have a good evening and a good early morning. Joe Kiernan, good night.
Same to you, Michael. Thank you.
Triangulate the truth, people. We're out.
Keeps going through the dark.